Good morning, everyone. I've got another video for you after a long night of writing. Wanted to talk about the virus today. You know, my article, which will be coming up in the Frontier Center of Public Policy, is about Coronaphobia and how it is a fear that exceeds the reality of what this virus presents. I've got links for these in the video description, but the model that was used at the start of this pandemic that predicted a massive amount of deaths has been shown to be very flawed. I want to show you what some of these charts are. You know, the projection was that there was going to be 326,000 COVID deaths in Canada. Well, we've had 10,000 to this point now. In the United States, it was going to be 2.6 million. They've had 228,000. And the CDC reported in August that actually it was only 6% of the cases that were from COVID-19 alone, without any other causes that were underlying. So that would suggest the number of people who died by COVID alone in the United States is less than 14,000, and in Canada to date it would be just over 600. Think about that. I want to show you if you'd have taken that model that was done by Neil Ferguson and you'd applied it to other diseases, this is the result that you would have gotten. Far, far in excess of what it actually is. What things turned out to be. Okay. So, this was a fascinating article, and there's more depth here than I can get into, but Celia Farber asks, was this PCR test meant to detect a virus? And her answer is no. Now, this journalist actually talked to the inventor of the test before he died. He's a very interesting man, Kary Mullis, who invented the polymerase chain reaction process. Now, what that actually does is it basically replicates. It's a process where you take some of these fragments and test for them. And he did not think it was useful as a diagnostic process. He also said some things about HIV and its relationship to AIDS that you might also find interesting as well. But when you get to, there's a Canadian in here who's got a podcast who's looked into it. And it's incredible some of the things that he says, because this test is not, it's not like a binary test where yes you have it, no you don't have it. There's sort of a continuum. And depending on how you interpret the tests and how many cycles you do, you'll get different results. Okay? So this is what the test does. It says you start with one molecule. You start with a small amount of DNA, and on each cycle the amount doubles. Okay, so if you double it 30 times, you get 1 billion times more material than you started with. So it's a manufacturing technique. It's great. What they do is they attach a fluorescent molecule to the RNA as they produce it. You shine a light at one wavelength, you get a response, you send light back at a different wavelength. So they measure the amount of light that comes back, and that's their surrogate for how much DNA there is. I'm using the word DNA. There's a step in RT-PCR test, which is where you convert the RNA to DNA. So the PCR test is actually not using the viral RNA, it's using DNA, but it's like the complementary RNA, so logically it's the same thing, but it can be confusing. Wow, you're telling me. Okay. Anyway, he goes on to say that when you look at what the recommended amount of cycles are, in some they say 37, in some they say 36. If you had 37 to 40, it was considered indeterminate. If you got in that range, you did more testing. So he says if you cut it off at 20 cycles, everyone would be negative. If you cut it off at 50, you might have everybody positive. Okay, this is how flimsy these tests are, right? And we already know from, well, there's been other experts here, okay, Bulgarian Pathology Association, it says that the tests are scientifically meaningless. And it gets into, in a peer-reviewed way, why this doesn't really work. Okay, so now when we look in Canada, you see the number of cases that there's been, right? Now, what this chart used to do, it seems to me that it used to be able to just have a breakdown that would just be deaths, right? Not everything else. But now you can only have cases. Now, there used to be a way you could have deaths alone, but now you can't. Deaths produces something here that is only a little bit of a part of the chart. Now, some anomaly happened here. I don't know what, they just announced a whole bunch of recoveries. I mean, that was goofy. So when you look at it today, this is the supposed second wave, where you're getting 2,000 cases a day in Canada, and you're only getting, what, at the peak of it, it was 1120. So you think, oh my gosh, the second wave, it's going to overwhelm us. But when you look at the deaths, there's not even 30 deaths, right now, okay? So now, if you were to look here, back here, there was a time here where you had more than 100 deaths every single day for more than a month, okay? So we're not even anywhere near that, but we're testing a lot more. So you test a lot more, you find a lot more positives, except according to Barbara Yaffe, who's the assistant medical director in Ontario, you could have as much as 50% false positives. And there was a Chinese researcher that said you could have 80%. There was a New York Times article that suggested you could have as much as 90% false positives. And again, this is not deaths of coronavirus. This is deaths with coronavirus. So again, even the deaths with coronavirus, it's only 6% of those deaths that are actually solely from coronavirus. So what, 0.6 times 21, I mean, you get like 1 and a bit. I mean, this is, but yet we're watching the news and these numbers come up all the time about what's happening, right? So then people get afraid. Okay, here's the actual deaths. Now we got it on Google. This was the first wave, and this is the second wave, if you can even call this a second wave. There we are. Now, who suffers the most from coronaphobia? The surprise is, or maybe not a surprise, but it's interesting, that if you're a left-leaning voter, you're going to be way more afraid of COVID than you are if you're a right-winger. So here we've got, I'm going to bring in some comments here. Someone's totally with me. Perfecto Productions, it is Perfecto. Crew Luke, yes, tired of hearing about cases. I'm glad you're with me. So, okay, conservatives, 66% completely comfortable and 23% more comfortable than not at voting. If you look at these numbers for Liberals and NDP, there's only 26% of NDPers that are completely comfortable. So the left wing calls people Islamophobic, transphobic, this phobic, that phobic. The left wingers here are the ones that are too scared to vote in person. And the conservative voters aren't buying that. Liberal voters, they're scared too. Same thing in America. Guess what? They did They did a poll there. 73% of Republicans feel comfortable voting during the pandemic versus 42% of Democrats. If you vote for the Democrats, you might have coronaphobia. You vote for the Republicans, you might be a redneck. Now, Epic Times today, who I also write for, the red states, that's the Republican ones, have better economies and better unemployment data, okay? So if you look at the 10 states with the lowest unemployment rates in September, 9 of those states voted for President Trump in 2016. And of the 10 states with the highest unemployment, 9 of those voted for Hillary Clinton. Well, isn't that interesting? If you look at the unemployment rates in those Republican red states, they have risen on average by less than 2.7% compared to September 2019, and in the blue states they rose by nearly 5 points. So that is very substantial, and it gets into more of what these numbers really mean. But of course, we can only hear a limited amount of all of this because there's social media censorship, and there's all kinds of ways that continues to happen, even though sometimes the official information contradicts the former things that these same people said. You can think about Fauci with masks and the like. That's all I wanted to share with you. Because of censorship, I encourage you to share this video with somebody that you think needs to hear it. And you have a great day, Canada. Thanks for watching.